Okay, here's secret knowledge about the tarot, which you will not hear anywhere else, okay, because most tarot readers will never tell you this secret about reading the tarot. As long as you read the cards, in other words, keep your discussion focused on the cards. As long as you read the cards, it doesn't matter what you say. Okay? The cards are based on archetypal forces and experiences we all have in our lives. By synchronicity, what you say will catch on to the psychic hooks of the client. I don't like the term querent. Normally, the person who's asking for a tarot reading is called the querent, but I don't particularly like that term for a variety of reasons. And so I'm going to refer to the person to whom I'm giving the reading as the client, okay? So by synchronicity, you will say things, perhaps many things, which connect with certain psychic hooks in each client. Different for each client if it is a group reading, which is what my auditorium example is about. So in other words, like my example of the barn raising, probably no one else at this table has a sore spot in their psyche about Pennsylvania Dutch barn raising, right? But I mean, if you did a reading that somehow happened to make a link for me to that movie or that event or Pennsylvania Dutch generally, because a quarter of my ancestry is Amish, Pennsylvania Dutch, okay, both my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side. So I guess, is that half of my ancestry?
Yeah, what was your mom?
Well, my mother was their child, but no, they weren't Amish. Okay, so both my grandfather and my grandmother escaped the life. So now we're gonna go to page 2 of this outline. But I want to talk about the dimensions in minor arcana. Okay, this is the other 56 cards that make up the deck after the archetypal life cards. And those are pentacles, which represent wisdom, cups represent emotion, wands represent power, and swords represent discernment. So in the masculine feminine dimension, okay, these are dimensions that I've put here. Okay, so in the masculine feminine dimension, pentacles and cups pentacles and cups are feminine, and wands and swords are masculine. Okay, not by gender, but by principle. So everybody can have these aspects in each one of them. Okay, so then if we look at the Myers-Briggs dimension, then pentacles would be the sensing dimension, cups is the feeling dimension, wands is the thinking dimension, and swords is the intuition dimension. If we look at the dimension of the elements as described in medieval alchemy, then pentacles represents earth, cups water, wands fire, and swords air. Okay, and in time, these cards, pentacles represents years. So earth, developed all these species in 800 million years, so it's a long-term deal, right? Earth, pentacles, okay, and pentacles are also like coins. They're a richness. So pentacles represent years. Cups represents months because of the feminine, because of the female cycle, obviously, is within that. So if in the reading you're coming up with cups in the reading, you're talking about something that's feminine. You can think of it. I mean, these are
like an actual picture of cups.
right, and we're going to look at the cards in a minute, but these are the 4 suits. So think of them like the 4 suits in playing cards, which is where they came from, actually. Okay, and in fact, the Rider-Waite deck, I think I was told that the Rider-Waite deck is the first deck that actually has pictures with every card. Okay, in the past, they didn't put pictures on the minor arcana, only on the major arcana. And so, in the old days, the suits were playing card suits, right? So let's see. Cups is hearts. Pentacles is diamonds. Wands is clubs, and swords is spades, right?
Sounds right.
That sounds right. Okay. And so the point is, you can think when you're doing a reading, these are just devices for you when you're looking at a card. You can think about these dimensions and see which ones connect with your unconscious, because you're actually doing the reading for yourself as well as for the client. Okay. All right. So,
how do you mean that? It's good.
Well, when you do a reading, you have to go into your own unconscious, because it's sparking unconscious content, which you're bringing forth in the reading. But it's just like psychotherapists. Psychotherapists have to be very grounded. Jungian analysts have to have an analyst, a Jungian analyst that works with them, because when you're with 7 or 8 patients a day and your mind is going whoom, 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 you need somebody to ground you sometimes. Okay. That's also a good thing to do with the cards. You need to stay grounded with the cards, okay? Because they will kick off things in your own psyche. And
so there is a transference.
There is a transfer. You are intentionally working with these archetypal forces and energies. You're intentionally working with those. Your client doesn't know that necessarily. I mean, I'm telling you stuff that's behind the curtain here, right? Because when you're reading, you're not talking about these dimensions and apples and oranges and that stuff. Everything that I've talked about, you're never going to say to a client, okay? Unless the client is you and you're doing a reading for yourself. But what I'm teaching you to do is to do a reading, okay, and to understand what that reading means, right? Okay, so there's a couple of other simple things here. There's a yes-no confirmation, so you can just flip up any card and get either a yes or no if it's a numbered card, right? So if it's an odd number, it's a yes, and if it's an even number, it's a no. And every number has to be in single digits. So when you get to 10, based on the tradition of numerology, you're adding the 1 and the 0, which means 1, so you're back to the odd numbers again. So 10 is actually...
But the first thing I thought of when I saw that was, what is 0?
Well,
is that the pleroma?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
By the way, I have that book. I have that deck, too.
Oh, you do?
Just remembered
Cool.
it, yeah.
Oh, cool. I'm just a novice.
He's a future master.
Well, I may be a future master. I do know how to read the cards because I'm so intuitive. I find no difficulty in reading the cards. And so somebody who's extremely sensing might have a hard time. Okay, but on the other hand, maybe not, because if they have this structure, then they know, okay, I have to go to this and this and this structure. And so for them, maybe it's a little bit more herky-jerky. For me, it just flows, okay? And by the way, the Indian mystic he wasn't a mystic, he was just a guy. He was a 30-year-old guy. But the interesting thing is that some traditions suggest that the tarot came out of India. And I believe that because the Romani came out of India. That's the gypsies, right? And so they came into Europe. I mean, the histories I was reading go back to the 15th century, but the Romani came out of India in about the year 1000. And so I think they brought the tarot with them then. And that's how they were keeping going, and still how they're keeping going. They still exist all over Europe. Okay, so just these are again just very brief devices for memory purposes on numbers. Okay, so on numbers, the number one represents wholeness, and it leads to action. If you have one of anything, you don't have anything. Well, actually, that's not right. If you have a zero, you don't have anything. But if you have one of anything, it's pretty boring unless something happens, and that's where two comes in, right? And so once two comes in, then you have polarity. Then when three comes in, you have a superordinate, a trinity, which makes unity possible. So in other words, in all opposites, like the yin and yang, the opposites are opposite. But you have to have a third thing come in that allows some leakage between the two opposites. And that's what the third thing is. So, if you think of a family, okay, in the polarity, you have a couple and that's your opposites. But once you have a child, that's a superordinate, and it creates, right? And it creates complications,
three
right?
superordinates is.
Right. Okay, so then 4 again is feminine, and it's organization, like organizing the family. And it's traditionally the wife is the one that organizes the family. And she may not pick where you're going to live, but she's going to make it look nice, right? And organize it, right? One hopes, yeah. Okay, so 5 is the natural man, the Anthropos, the son of wisdom, Adam Kadmon, the clarified body. Okay. 6 is creation and evolution. You have to think of the Star of David, okay, with an upward,
Male, female.
yeah, male, female, an upward triangle and a downward triangle. And so that represents creation and evolution. And it's the interaction of male and female energies, right? 7 is transformation, 7 stages of transformation. And there are many traditions that involve 7 stages. So in the cards, you'll find that there very often are 7 stars or 7 somethings, but usually it's stars. So like the Empress has 7 stars in her crown. So it's the combination of the masculine trinity and the feminine quaternity. 3 plus 4 equals 7. Okay. Okay, number 8 represents a new order. So what I'm going to be talking about is there's 3 phases of the tarot. And So 8 represents infinity. It represents a new cycle. And so if 1 through 7 go through as an uninterrupted series, 8 creates the next cycle, the something new, okay, which I'll explain to you in a minute. Okay, number 9 is a completion. It's the end of a pregnancy. It's the end of single digits. It's the end of the developmental series. It's feminine wholeness. And it makes conscious. And either at 9, you either make conscious what came through in the previous cards, or it falls back into the deep unconscious and you have to start the whole process again. Okay, so it's either going to come up into consciousness and be assimilated, or it falls back into the deep unconscious, and then you have to start over again. Okay. 10 represents the tree of life, unity, perfection, perfect unfolding of unity. And it's feminine as a odd or even number, but because of numerology, it's also 1, and therefore it's masculine, and that's where you get the unity. And the traditional Jewish Kabbalists, talked about the tree of life, and this is where they went.